Oh, okay. No. Oh, okay. Thank you. Hello? Julia, are you online?
I am online, Sister Mamalifa. Good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm fine, and you? Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So, welcome back. As I was saying, that now we would like to move from the reflection to action, and we want to explore practical tools for advocacy, learning how to engage with decision makers, and also to prepare meetings and write policy statements, and how we can engage in sustained dialogue. So systemic transformation requires not only passion, but also skills. If we don't have skills, and this is what we hear all the time when we talk to people, say, but I don't have the skills. Translation? Okay.
Sí, se escucha.
Español? Sí? Okay. Is the sound back? It's okay? Okay. So now it is the time that in this session, Julia will be sharing with us practical skills that can help us do our work. And I would like to invite Father Marianum, who will be the moderator of this session. You know, he's a Spiritan and he's so humble that he doesn't want to be introduced. So, but you know his name and his congregation. It's called Marianum, a Spiritan. So he's full of the Spirit. So I will hand over to you now.
Gracias. Voy a hablar en español porque yo y el inglés no somos muy amigos. Entonces, pues, bueno, gracias a la hermana Mamalifa. Yo soy de la Congregación del Espíritu Santo, soy de Paraguay. Bueno, entonces ahora, esta parte, como ella ya nos explicó lo que va a contener esta última parte, entonces ya, sin perder tiempo, invitamos a Julia Cirilo, que está en línea, para que pueda ya compartirnos su experiencia.
Muchísimas gracias. Hello,
Julia,
everyone.
Julia, please wait. Let us introduce you before you start.
Sorry.
No? Okay. English. Sorry. Okay, so Julia Isabella Chililo is the advocacy coordinator of UISG at UISG, designs and implement programs to build advocacy and communication capacity, explore faith and development links, and expand partnership opportunities for UISG and Catholic sisters worldwide. She supports sisters and their communities in promoting social and environmental justice through UISG Global Network, leverages UISG as a globally connected locally rooted network to deliver sustainable systemic change. She holds a bachelor's degree in classics and master's degree in gender studies from the University of Cambridge. Formerly worked with humanitarian and development organizations in Rome, London, Malta, and Spain. So Julia, you're most welcome to share your experience and expertise with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Mamalifa. Thank you for inviting me to be here. It's great to join you this afternoon or this morning, wherever you are. And without further ado, I will start sharing my screen. My presentation today is entitled A Toolbox for Advocacy, and the idea is that my presentation will focus on a very introductory idea of what we might need in order to actually practically get going as advocates. So you can see the subtitle of the presentation is Getting Started, Embracing Advocacy as and where we find ourselves. To give you an overview of the contents, what we'll be looking at today, and can you see the presentation properly on screen? I just want to check.
Yes, can you make it in the presentation mode?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you.
Is that better?
Done.
Perfect. Thank you. So what we'll be looking at today is, first of all, an overview of what advocacy actually is, because advocacy is a concept that means different things in different contexts. So just a little overview on that. Then we'll be looking at the distinction between action and advocacy, which is another way of looking at what advocacy isn't, and it's also useful to define the boundaries, the limits of what advocacy is and isn't. And then I want to share this idea of advocacy as a three-part process, focused on these three steps, which we could very succinctly describe as gathering data, building narrative, and engaging decision makers. I'll talk a little bit about gathering data and building narrative. I won't talk as much about engaging decision makers, because my understanding is the next presentation will focus more on that. And finally, we'll have a quick look at advocacy in context, this idea of starting as and where we find ourselves. So, what is advocacy? The word advocacy, at least in English, contains the Latin root of the word voice, as in to give voice. So we might say that advocacy is the pursuit of giving voice to people on the margins of society, people who don't otherwise have a voice or struggle to be heard, particularly in our global society. On what is increasingly a global stage, there are communities that have been left out on the margins. And I think how this connects, first of all, apart from anything else, how this connects to the work of men and women religious is that we know hundreds of thousands of women and men religious are serving precisely those marginalized communities around the world. And so they find themselves in a unique position to speak on issues of justice and peace with great authority. And we'll look more at this a little bit later. But firstly, this idea that advocacy is giving voice. However, in its original sense, the Latin root vocare is not a noun, as in voice, but it's a verb. And as a verb, it particularly means to call someone, to do something, or to take action. So advocacy is giving voice to those who are marginalized, to those who are silenced. But it's also, on the other side of the coin, calling upon those who can take action, often those in power, those who have privileges, calling upon others to take action for the most vulnerable. And this again connects deeply with the mission of men and women religious. It creates opportunities for Catholic religious to engage in the world in new ways. For example, to connect with interreligious and secular partners in global development, to consider what decision makers are accessible to us and how we can influence them, and to see our mission overall as intersecting with a global landscape that can and must be influenced by the wisdom of communities on the ground, on the front lines of humanitarian and all sorts of development-related emergencies, which are otherwise often silenced. So to me, and I hope it's clear, there's this idea of advocacy. Perhaps we could look at it as a sphere. One half of the sphere is giving voice, and the other half of the sphere is calling upon, giving voice to those who are silenced and calling upon those who must take action. Speaking of action, I think the next interesting kind of concept is this idea of what advocacy isn't. And that also, right, helps us to define by exclusion what advocacy is. So we would talk about advocacy as being distinct from action. And by action, I mean direct action on the ground. I mean direct, for example, humanitarian service. I mean action that's focused on directly serving the needs of communities. So we've developed this idea over the years at UASG that action is about immediate response, whereas advocacy is about a longer term vision. Action is reactive to a need, whereas advocacy is about proactive outreach. And action is about a more case-based approach, whereas advocacy has to be long-term in its vision and proactive in its outreach because it seeks to effect systemic change. It seeks not just to take a case-by-case approach, but to change systems. Now, an idea of this in practice. So according to this definition, we might say that advocacy is not, for example, finding emergency housing for a family that's new to the area. That would be a direct action that we're undertaking. But if over and over again we see a system that perpetuates a situation where families struggle to find housing, then we might, as advocates, work with housing providers in our area to agree some guidelines for welcoming and housing new families. So that's how we would be shifting from a more case-based approach to a more systemic approach. Or similarly, establishing a community garden within a local school. Certainly that's an action. On its own, perhaps it's not advocacy, but if we are passionate about this work and we decide to write up a report for the Education Board with a proposal to implement this community garden initiative across all the schools in our area, we might be stepping more towards a role as advocates. A final example, sheltering a victim of human trafficking and her children is an action that might be part of our mission. And as we move towards our vision of the mission as advocates, we might decide that we also would move towards supporting victims to access legal counsel and prosecute perpetrators, thus challenging the system itself. Now, I hope these examples are helpful to clarify a distinction, but what I also want to clarify is it's not a clear-cut distinction. And I hope what this image shows is it's more of a spectrum. Right? There's no point, and often it's really, difficult to at least find a clear point where action becomes advocacy. Our action and our advocacy are so enmeshed that often we're somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. But certainly if we think of the spectrum as having on one end an immediate response that's reactive to need, that's, a case-by-case approach where we do the next thing one foot in front of the other, and on the other end of the spectrum, a longer-term vision that's proactive in its effort to change a system, then that, to us, would be the action and advocacy spectrum. So I also want to highlight, because this is a spectrum and because the definition of advocacy is not always clear, and because we can define advocacy to suit our own needs to an extent and our own context, I do want to highlight that the definition of advocacy is also expanding. And in the work of the last 5 years at UISG, we've seen how sisters particularly have expanded this vision to new forms of less classical advocacy. So in certain development circles, classical advocacy might take place in the political arena. So it might consist of things like lobbying and presenting petitions. It might take place in the policy arena, researching certain issues, presenting reports to policymakers. It might take place in an institutional arena where we're, for example, changing the regulations of a school board, as we were saying before. It could take place in what I would describe as the influencing arena, this idea that kind of the media space and campaigning are also classical advocacy. And then finally, but last but not least, in the legal arena. So advocacy is also about prosecution, setting precedent, and changing legal frameworks. However, what we've seen in the past few years is that sisters are experimenting with new ways. Catholic religious are experimenting with new ways to expand this definition of advocacy. And I just want to highlight a few because I think it's very interesting to think about that expansion. So first of all, this question of training. If we are training a group of children in a school to plant their own vegetables, I would describe that more as action. We're taking action so that those children have a nutritious meal at the end of the month. But if we are training a group of older students, say a group of teenagers in high school, so that they can go and work with younger children and teach them to plant vegetables, and that's something that after receiving our training, the teenagers can go on and do, expanding their effect across the system, then this train the trainer approach, as it's known, might also come under the heading of advocacy, because it really is about saying, how can I expand my ripple effect across the system? So I think it's interesting to consider train the trainer approaches. It's interesting to consider educational programming more broadly. So if we're raising awareness with a class of students, perhaps that's more of an action than an advocacy. But if we are, as we were saying, implementing across a school system, regionally or nationally, an educational program that, for example, raises awareness of human trafficking, then we are elevating that work to the level of advocacy. And then I think there's these two very interesting areas of expansion. One is this idea that in an increasingly polarized world, in a world that's riven with conflict, with political polarization, even just creating space for dialogue and for cultural exchange, that in itself can be a form of advocacy, changing a discourse, changing a narrative, creating intercultural opportunities. That might be a way of challenging a system, as is bringing the strength of a spiritual framework into conversations about development. So I want to highlight, for example, that UISG has joined the Women, Faith and Climate Network, and that's a network that seeks to say, actually, faith is a key component of how many women around the world are taking on their own climate action, and reframing what spirituality means in the context of global development. That might also be a challenge to a number of systems. So I hope that's kind of given us a general overview of what advocacy is, what it isn't, how those definitions are fluid to some extent, and how they're also expanding. So to come to a more kind of practical then part of this presentation, I want to talk about advocacy as a three-part process. And this is where we really get into the idea of what skills do we need. Now, I don't have time today, I'm afraid, to get into the detail of any of these skills, but I do want to share an overview of what those skills might be, particularly as we seek to sort of rationalize the process of working as advocates. So I would describe the process of advocacy as a three-part process that's focused on, firstly, gathering data, secondly, building narrative, and thirdly, engaging decision makers. Now, what do we mean by these three kind of very general definitions? So gathering data is about extrapolating, surfacing, highlighting, whatever we want to call it. It's about extrapolating those marginalized perspectives. It's about gathering that knowledge of key development issues like climate change, like migration, all sorts of issues that exists. There is knowledge that exists on the margins of society that is not being tapped. It's not being heard, it's not being given space, it's not being listened to. So first of all, gathering data is about extrapolating those perspectives, finding ways to describe them, whether quantitatively or qualitatively. It's about emerging those hidden, often silenced perspectives. Then there's building narratives, which is saying, okay, so we see that there are these perspectives which decision makers should know about, but how do we translate those perspectives? Because so often we live in societies, we exist within systems where the people who are making decisions are not aware of realities on the ground. So how do we summarize and translate this knowledge that we've extrapolated for different contexts? And that's where building a narrative, building a sense of the story that we're telling is so key, it's so crucial. And then finally, engaging decision makers. So we have our data, we have our narrative. How do we influence power structures to affect change? And as I said, I'll give us a very brief overview of some thoughts on gathering data and building narrative. I will leave the section on engaging decision makers to the next speaker, because if I understand it correctly, that's what their presentation is mainly focused on. So, gathering data, a few questions to think about. How do we define the issue that we want to influence? What is the systemic change that we want to affect? What is the problem today? How would we see it being solved in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, right? A definition of the framework within which we're advocating is vital. Then, what is the broader context? So, what is, for example, the landscape? What are the latest developments on this issue? Say we're interested in advocating for sustainable agricultural practices in our community. What is the legislation? Are people allowed to plant a vegetable garden in their backyard? What are the best practices? How are other organizations working on this? What are the global events, the global moments? Are there, is anybody out there talking about sustainable agriculture? Right? So there's the definition of our issue, the definition of the context, and then there's the question of our own added value. What can we contribute to this issue within this landscape? What is the information that we can bring, the experience, the wisdom? And again, I can't stress this enough. Often it's not about our own information or experience or wisdom, but it's about the information, experience, and wisdom of the communities that we serve. What are they seeing? What do they know that decision makers are not seeing and do not know? And one final point that I want to make here is often gathering data can seem like an intimidating exercise. Firstly, because it sounds intimidating, and often it's seen as an exercise that has to be very numerical, for which we need very specific tools. It's very useful if we can get them to find access to some specific tools on data gathering to have a more informed and more kind of structured idea of what it can mean and how we can go about it. But fundamentally, I think it's important to remember often gathering data is something that in the scope of mission is already happening for the purposes of fundraising. Often when we say we need money, we're already saying what we need it for. And there is data there about the problems that we're tackling. So this is where action and advocacy are so closely intertwined, because whatever actions we're taking, the data that that's based on is often the data on which we can also base our advocacy. Or if we already are lucky enough to have some money, to have a grant, to have a, whatever it is, a fund, then the monitoring and evaluation that's expected on that grant, on that fund, will also require us to gather some data. So sometimes when we're thinking about advocating, it's useful to look around and say, where is data already being gathered in the context of our mission? Excuse me. Now, gathering data is a part of the advocacy process where the primary audience, I would say not even audience, but the primary group that we work with is our knowledge base. So knowledge, as I've already said, on the issues around which we advocate lies with the communities that we serve. They have the most direct experience, and therefore it is their voices, their perspectives, their wisdom that we are trying to emerge through this data gathering exercise. And I think it's very important to keep that in mind, because we can get so sidetracked, for example, by the numbers. How many people have we taught? How many people have we helped to plant a vegetable garden? How many people attended our training sessions? But actually, the question is, what are we able to emerge about the knowledge that those people have and that decision makers need to hear? That's the key question. In the development sphere, these communities can sometimes be described as beneficiaries or service users. I personally don't love either of those definitions. I think as a knowledge base, the emphasis is on their contribution. And I think that's really important to bear in mind. Actually, the people that we're speaking to in these data gathering exercises, those are people who have a contribution to make, and we are a vessel for that contribution. So we are very much, in fact, beneficiaries of their knowledge. And finally, I want to highlight this idea of advocating for and with those communities. So the ideal is that we are taking the microphone, or sometimes seeking a microphone, finding out where we can speak, who we can talk to, how we can advocate, creating opportunities to speak up. But ultimately, the objective is to pass on that microphone, which in practical terms means empowering communities to advocate for themselves. How can we open doors that other people can step through? That would be the question around gathering data and liaising with our knowledge base. So, step 2, building narrative. Now, communicating for advocacy is a particular passion of mine. I could talk about this for hours, and we don't have that time. So I really just want to leave you with this idea of 3 key aims that we might bear in mind as we're building a narrative, which, as I've said, is that process of translating the knowledge that we've accrued for an audience that does not understand our context. That's the harsh reality. And for me, the 3 aims that we might keep in mind are result, impression, and connection. So in terms of result, who is our audience? Who do we want to reach? And thinking about this as we build our narrative will serve us very, very well when it comes to the 3rd step of engaging with decision makers. To know that audience as we build the narrative, as we develop our story, is vital. Secondly, what's the message? What's the key thing that we want people to know about the change that we want to create? And thirdly, what is the action? What will we be asking decision makers to do? And this is really crucial and, in my experience, surprisingly easy to forget. It's the point of the whole exercise, and yet we can get so wrapped up in the story that we're telling. Often we can get wrapped up, with the best of intentions in our passion for the stories that we're telling about the lives of real people, that we forget to say, so please do this. Connecting our audience, our message, and the action that we're asking for is vital. Secondly, this question of impression. As we move from a space of action to a space of advocacy, it's important to recognize that we are making an impression, and it's a new impression. Often, for Catholic sisters, at least in our experience, it's an impression that they haven't made before. So, the questions might be, first of all, what is the profile that we want to develop? How do we want to be known? And to give a more concrete example of that, do we want to be known as particularly authoritative? So do we want to be known as a group that really knows everything about the situation, has a real handle on the data? Do we want to be known as trustworthy partners, committed, dedicated to raising other voices? Do we want to be known as, for example, as particularly spiritual contributors? Is that the focus? And of course, the ideal is that we're making all these wonderful impressions at the same time. But sometimes resources are scarce, opportunities are scarce, and so focusing on the profile that we want to build and what the one impression that we would want to make would be if we had to choose one, that can also be valuable. And then as we make this impression, what are the facts? So this goes back to our data gathering. What is our key evidence? What are we going to hold on to prove our point? And what are the risks? What do we want to avoid as we open ourselves up to a new profile? What are the questions that we would prefer not to be asked? Because there might be questions about ourselves or our communities. There might be things that are politically sensitive. There might be things that are sensitive to the lives of the people that we work with. I'm hearing a little echo now. I don't know if something changed in the setup.
Julia,
Yeah.
you have 5 more minutes to go.
Okay, great. I'm coming to an end. And then there's the question of connection. So as we build a connection, as we will go on to build a connection with the decision makers that we're trying to engage, the questions are, how can we clarify? How can we simplify and repeat a point that everybody can understand? How can we really own our narrative to project authenticity? Because authenticity creates connection. And I think a good question to ask is, how can we surprise our audience? How can we be different from what people expect? Because that can be very memorable. The uniqueness, the element of surprise can be very valuable. And in building narrative, the focus is, where previously it was on our knowledge base, here it's on our allies. So a few thoughts on building alliances. I think it's worth thinking about researching alliances, so understanding the landscape of other groups working on these issues, reaching out to offer support before anything else, because we don't want to step on anyone's toes, mapping the intersections of our work with the work of others, and avoiding duplications. In other words, as we build a narrative, who else is out there with a story on the same issue? What are they saying, and what can we say together? Apologies, I've had a nasty flu and it's just at the end of things.
Un poquito de agua.
Sí, la verdad es que sí. Gracias. We've researched our alliances, so then we want to build them. If we're building actual partnerships, how are we clarifying the goals of those partnerships, their timescales, and also their limitations? What might be the conflicts of interest? How are we sustaining those alliances? In other words, have we established with our partners how we seek consensus and how we handle disagreements as we build together towards a stronger narrative? And how can we learn from those alliances? How can we reflect on the mutual benefits and the areas for improvement? A very quick look at who our allies might be. So our allies might be governmental. That would be lawmakers, public servants, ambassadors, diplomats, intergovernmental bodies, including the UN, lawyers, lobbyists. They might be institutional. That would be businesses, whether local or global, healthcare institutions, educational institutions, media platforms. And then we're looking as well at civil society. So we might be building alliances as we build our narrative with consumer unions, labor unions, community groups, faith groups, charities, NGOs, or even social media networks, not conventional media platforms, but communities that exist online. And as we come to the end, I am going to leave this here because, as I say, the next presentation will focus more on this, but I think as we come to engage with decision makers, it's important to say, what do we bring to decision makers within the development community and what's unique about the way that we operate in this context? For UISG, we define our presence as a contribution. Catholic religious are present in some of the most difficult, remote, inaccessible contexts around the world. We define belonging as a contribution. We advocate for marginalized communities as the organic consequence of a shared life, and that's a very unique position to be in. And we have this unique access. We are a voice that can speak up where others can't, but also do so with an authority rooted in experience. And the way that we do this, again, as we describe it at UISG, is inclusive. We leave no one behind. It's integrative. We build bridges, we bridge differences, we motivate diverse groups to journey together, and it's integral in the sense of holistic and spiritual and focused on root causes to achieve long-term solutions. That's a very brief overview of advocacy as a three-part process. So just some reflections to close, and I will take 1 minute in terms of embracing advocacy as and where we find ourselves. In our own context, I would describe advocacy as a process of transferring knowledge. Advocacy is transferring knowledge from our communities, together with our allies, to our decision makers. And all of this happens through ourselves and our work. As we've said, we are the vessel. So how do we reflect on ourselves as the vessel? I think it's important to acknowledge our positionality, where we speak from, how our own identity impacts the message that we're transferring, and to recognize, for the effectiveness of our advocacy, cultural specificity. What parts of a message are relevant to different audiences, what strategies work in different contexts. I want to encourage you by saying accessing knowledge, particularly in the data gathering part of the advocacy process, can seem intimidating because it can seem about moving things to a grander scale. We think, gosh, the system of oppression within which people operate is so complex. How are we going to tackle that grander scale? But actually, advocacy is often not about going bigger. It can mean going smaller, not widening the focus, but digging into the granular detail, exploring local knowledge at a granular level. And as we've said, emerging things that other people don't know. So I want to encourage you. Data gathering is not as complicated as it can sometimes feel. And organizing knowledge, this question of building a narrative, is also not as complicated as it can sometimes feel. If the classic metaphor is packaging our narrative, I would invite us to think about our narrative more as an exhibit table, a generous table full of the things that we want to say. How do we lay out that content? Where do we place our table? Who can access it? How do we engage passers-by? Because people aren't just going to ask us for our opinion. How do we make ourselves interesting? And are we ready to take the questions, to take the engagement that might come at us? I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Julia. Nos has ayudado así de forma rápida para hacer una diferencia entre acción concreta y incidencia o advocacy. Y después la forma como se organiza la advocacy y los diferentes elementos y niveles que eso conlleva. Muchas gracias. Este material que tienes vamos a compartir, supongo, con los participantes y vamos a tener físicamente. Muchas gracias. No te vayas, que después vamos a abrir para las preguntas. ¿Ok?
Claro, muchísimas gracias.
Pues continuando con con las personas que nos ayudan a entender mejor nuestro trabajo de advocacy y demás. Tenemos presente aquí al hermano Tino, ¿no? Entonces aquí nos va a presentar lo que él es y lo que fue.
So our next speaker is Brother Tino Edmond Rice International. He's a member of the Congregation of Christian Brothers, India, educator with over 30 years of experience as a classroom teacher and teacher trainer, former leader and administrator in Christian Brothers schools across India, based in Geneva since 2017 with Edmond Rice International, facilitator of training programs promoting a shift from service-based models to a right-based approach within Edmond Rice and partner networks. Engage with United Nations human rights mechanisms through Edmond Rice International. Advocate for the promotion and protection of human rights and the environment with a particular focus on the rights and well-being of children. Committed to congregational and global efforts to build a more just and sustainable world. Brother, you are welcome.
Thank you very much, sister, as well as, okay. And Julia, thank you very much for setting the stage for the second part of the presentation. It's slow. Okay. Yeah.
We are trying to sort out something here. Please, translators, just to let you know that we have encountered some difficulty. Just give us some time. Thank you.
So if, with all our technology, okay, things still go wrong. But let me start. Thank you very much to both Roy as well as Mama Lifa for the invitation to be here. I'm in the same office as Budi, okay? And I would have actually joined you online, but I'm happy I actually came here and joined you yesterday because it's been such an enriching experience for me. And so thank you to all the speakers who have gone before, and for especially their testimonies, which really were very heart-touching. And it really motivates me in what I'm doing. And so coming to Edmund Rice International, we are a faith-based non-governmental organization with UN ECOSOC status, based in Geneva, as well as New York, and committed to human rights and advocacy. And we are basically the joint initiative of two congregations, both are Irish congregations, the Congregation of Christian Brothers and the Congregation of Presentation Brothers, okay? I think I've gone off the screen, my PowerPoint. Okay, back. All right. All right, and that's the reason why both these congregations came together. We have the same founder, Blessed Edmund Rice. So we advocate for human rights with a special focus on children, women, disability, and care of the earth in our global network, which is present in about 23 different countries worldwide. And to work towards these objectives, we have a two-pronged strategy. The first is human rights and advocacy capacity building training programs. And the second is engagement with the UN human rights mechanisms and the Human Rights Council in Geneva. So I just want to delve a little bit on human rights. What are human rights? And we have Mary Robinson, who was the former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, who says, human rights are inscribed in the heart of people. And today we heard a lot about the heart, okay? They were there long before lawmakers drafted their proclamation. And what is this proclamation she's really talking about? Okay, it's a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted after World War II by the UN General Assembly on 10 December 1948, right? And so there are basically 30 rights in the UDHR. And what are the principles that underline these rights? Human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, all. They're universal and inalienable. Inalienable, they cannot be taken away. They're interdependent and indivisible. You can't talk about one right, okay, at the exclusion of another. They're equal and non-discriminatory. And so you can think of any discrimination, right? Y'all are working in areas where there is lots of discrimination. All those people, all those groups, okay, these rights belong to all of them. And they're both rights and obligations. Another former UN High Commissioner says the power of the UDHR is the power of ideas to change the world. It inspires us to continue working to ensure that all people can gain freedom, equality, and dignity. And that is the motivation that keeps us going, that keeps you going. One vital aspect of this task is to empower people, and Julia also stressed this over there in her presentation, to demand what should be guaranteed, their human rights. And so now I'm going to, Judy did a wonderful job in sharing with you what advocacy, quite a comprehensive sharing over there. I'm looking at advocacy from the viewpoint, okay, or from the lens of human rights. So the definition I like, there are lots of different definitions, is advocacy in all its forms seeks to ensure that people, particularly those who are most vulnerable in society, are empowered to have their voice heard on human rights issues that are important to them, to defend and safeguard their rights, and have their views and wishes genuinely considered when decisions are being made about their lives. So I'm just going to pause over here. Each one of you is working with people or groups that are the most vulnerable, the furthest away in society. I'm going to invite you to picture in your mind and in your heart one of those faces or one of those groups. Just picture them. And keep that picture before you through this presentation. Keep that picture with you. How do you ensure that their voice is heard on human rights issues, on the issues that matter to them? How do you help to empower them to defend and safeguard their rights? That person, that group. Or have their views and wishes genuinely considered when decisions are being made about their lives. So the approach that we now take is called a rights-based approach to advocacy. And in this framework is grounded in human rights principles and seeks to ensure that all people can claim and exercise their rights. It shifts the focus, and this is where we are very good and were very good and focused on in our past, okay, from charity or needs-based assistance, helping, reaching out, helping, to now empowerment and accountability. Two key words, empowerment and accountability. So people have a right to live with dignity, and governments have a duty to uphold these rights. So in a rights-based issue, okay, Julia talked about giving voice, okay, and also seeking voice, right? So over here, I call it duty bearers. We have duty bearers and we have rights holders. So rights holders are the ones we give voice to, okay? They are all people, all of us. That vulnerable face, that person or group you have in your mind, that's the right holder. Who are the duty bearers? The duty bearers are people or entities who are obliged, who have a duty to deliver and ensure human rights. And in this particular case that we're talking about, okay, especially at the international UN level, it's the state. They are the primary duty bearer. So I'm just going to skip, okay, let me just go back to that particular one. I'm just looking at RBA as applied to education, okay? So rather than treating education as a service, okay, provided out of generosity, the rights-based approach treats it as a legal and moral obligation. And when we do that, it helps to create sustainable, equitable, and participatory education systems. And that is what we are aiming for. That should be our objective, where every child can not only go to school, but also learn and thrive, right? And so we look at SDG 4, which talks about quality education. So now, okay, how do we engage at the UN level? And so here you have a picture of the Human Rights Council room in Geneva. And the UN Human Rights Council is a forum empowered to prevent abuses, inequity, and discrimination, protect the most vulnerable, and expose perpetrators. And this Human Rights Council is made up of 47 states that are elected for a 3-year period. And they have the responsibility to remind all 193 states that are part of the UN to respect and implement all human rights and freedoms. They serve as an international forum for dialogue on human rights issues with UN officials, mandated experts like the special rapporteurs, states, civil society like ourselves, and other participants. They adopt resolutions or decisions which send a strong political signal which can prompt governments to take action to remedy any violations. Here are some of the UN human rights mechanisms that the Human Rights Council reviews. So one is the Universal Periodic Review, which takes place every 4.5 years, but the Council also appoints special procedures or special rapporteurs who serve as the eyes and ears of the Council. They are independent human rights experts, okay? And how do they keep their independence? They are not paid by the UN, and that's how they keep their independence. So NGOs like ourselves, okay, can engage with the Human Rights Council and the UN because we have ECOSOC status.
Excuse me, as if there is no translation. Do you have? So we wait a bit.
Sí, se escucha. Sí, hermana, sí se escucha.
It's okay, no? Not yet. Okay, now it's back. Okay.
Okay, that gave me a chance to take a breath. That's good. Okay, but I should have used that moment also to check with you. How many of you all over here, your organizations have ECOSOC status? Okay, yeah, so all right, okay, yeah. So in fact, quite few, all right, okay, but all right, so those NGOs with ECOSOC status can participate in the Human Rights Council sessions as observers. We can address the Council during interactive discussions and debates, thus highlighting human rights violations around the globe and holding states accountable. And we do this by submitting written statements to the Human Rights Council, by making oral interventions, okay, to the Human Rights Council, especially during sessions. Right now, starting next Monday, is a 6-week session of the Human Rights Council. And during that time, ERI and ECOSOC NGOs will have opportunities to participate in debates, interactive dialogues with special rapporteurs, and there are 47 special rapporteurs with thematic mandates. Not all of them will be making reports, but some of them will be. Panel discussions and informal meetings. And yeah, last night I was just checking because just before coming here on Tuesday, I was booking slots. You have to book slots, okay, to have a place at the table. And there are hundreds of NGOs trying to book 10 slots, okay? So you have to be really quick. And I was happy to see that last night, okay, ERI has bagged slots for the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on disability, on the environment, on housing, adequate housing, okay, 2 on disability. One is a panel discussion, okay, and the 5th one, I forget now, but it'll come back. All right, so in the last session, which was held in September, okay, we delivered 10 oral statements. And in 2025, ERI delivered 27 oral or video statements. Now, this is, Julia talked about us being a vessel. That's lovely. I like to talk about us being a bridge or a conduit, okay, between the grassroots, where the action is really taking place, okay, and the international level, the UN, the Human Rights Council, right? We are just the bridge. We are bringing your stories. And yes, and that's why I was so happy yesterday, because y'all are working at the grassroots level, listening to your stories, listening to all that. And the question I'm asking is, especially, and that's why I asked how many of y'all are ECOSOC, have ECOSOC status. And the question really I'm asking is, how can JPIC, okay, connect all the work that is happening at the grassroots, the stories we heard yesterday, and they were just a sampling. How can we connect that to the international UN level? If we can do that, that I think would be a fantastic step. And there are ways. Okay, for example, Vivat International is a coalition of about 12 or 13 congregations. Okay, so there are ways, but we can explore that maybe later. Tomorrow, there might be an opportunity. All right, so I want to quickly go to 1 or 2 of our statements that we deliver. All right, yesterday we had Father Joseph, and okay, it was really heart-wrenching. He himself was emotionally moved when he was telling his story of what's happening in Myanmar. Okay, Budi today was talking about how another organization, okay, delivers the statements. Okay, that other organization is ERI. We deliver. Since the coup in 2021, we have delivered a statement on the violations, human rights violations taking place in Myanmar at every Human Rights Council session. And there are 3 that happen in a year, okay, on behalf of JRS, FI, Dominicans, okay, those who have people on the ground and therefore have to remain anonymous. We don't have people on the ground, so we can deliver the statement in our name. So I'm going to take you to one of these statements that was delivered last year, all right? And I hope this works. All right, let's see. Yeah, it is.
Intervention by video.
We will.
Okay,
Now
I'll just stop.
invite Edmund Rice International Limited, intervention by video.
Mr. President, we welcome the report of the Special Rapporteur on Myanmar and commend his recommendations, in particular the call for the military junta to end attacks against civilians and gross human rights violations. The humanitarian situation faced by internally displaced persons continues to be deeply concerning. We condemn the deliberate targeting of IDP camps and civilian buildings by the State Administration Council, including nearby religious and educational institutions. As fighting moves from rural areas to cities and towns, internal displacement and humanitarian needs continue to grow. We deplore the numerous attacks against medical infrastructure since the coup that have contributed to a dire healthcare situation and led to dangerously low rates of immunisations for children and worrying consequences for maternal health. It is concerning that as humanitarian needs mount, aid funding is unable to keep pace. We request members of the Council to 1. Prioritise funding for civil society organisations able to distribute humanitarian aid to remote locations affected by the ongoing conflict. 2, condemn in the strongest terms airstrikes and shelling against IDP camps, as well as civilian households, hospitals, clinics, schools, monasteries and church institutions, including through the use of unguided aerial bombs. 3, end impunity in Myanmar by ensuring the establishment of an international mechanism to hold perpetrators of atrocity crimes accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Now,
Okay, so again, that statement, and this is where I believe on the first 2 days, which I missed, the key word was collaboration, networking, and you heard Budi also talking about that, okay? This is an example of a very collaborative statement. In fact, we didn't draft it. It was drafted by JRS, FI, who have people on the ground. We only delivered it on their behalf. Okay, and that's what we, of course, we also have our own statements, but I just wanted to show this as a collaborative effort, all right? I'm just going to, okay. There are lots of links over here. These slides are there with you, okay? And so at any time, you can have a look at them. I just want to quickly go to the UPR, which is a state-led mechanism that regularly assesses the human rights situations of all UN member states, okay? And now, in South, I know USIG and Solidarity are very strong in South Sudan. Their UPR is coming up. The Philippines, their UPR is coming up next year. These are opportunities for faith-based organizations to make submissions. Now, why am I talking about the UPR? Because while to make statements, deliver statements at the Human Rights Council, you need to have ECOSOC status to make a submission for a UPR. You don't need ECOSOC status over there, okay? So that's why I'm talking about the UPR very specifically over here. And again over here, all right, always remember at an international level, at a UN level, the more collaboration, the more NGOs that are sponsoring a particular submission, the greater the impact. And so collaboration is key. All right, I'm just going to go fast forward because you have these slides over here, all right. All right, the second part I want to come to is our capacity building trainings. And the reason I'm actually focusing on this also over here is in March, we have a Zoom training coming up. All right, and the dates are there, 25th of March, 1st April, 29th April, 6th May. The first session, each of them is a 90-minute session. The first session is understanding the foundations of human rights and advocacy. The second one will be ERI's engagement with the human rights system. The third will be the SDGs and advocacy. The fourth one is care of the earth in the light of Laudato Si and the SDGs. Now, these sessions are free for any of our partners. And so I will be sending the link for registration to this to you, Roy, and you can circulate it. And not just yourselves, but if you think somebody at the grassroots level, okay, is would benefit from it, please encourage them to register. All right, so besides the Zoom training over here, we have two in-country or in Geneva trainings for 2 weeks, okay, one in June and one in November. The June one is coming up on the 14th, from the 14th to the 26th of June, and we have a participant who was here. Antonio was there for our November training. So Antonio, if you put on your mic and maybe just share one or two things that you'd like to about it. Just one or two. I've got only a few seconds left.
Okay, maybe quickly. For me, it was a great experience because it was very multicultural, as you can see the pictures. Also, it's presential, and the group is not big, so it's easy to share to create links also with other people in other countries, in other places, and also the contents, I think these Christian brothers, they have a lot of experience, as you can see, and I think we learn a lot, and you see the variety of cultures that we are there, no? And from different continents and so on. Actually, from the 5 continents, we were there. And for me, it was also a very good experience in the sense that you reach to the places. We enter in UN building. We were attending some of the sessions. And also, the possibility of sharing, no, in many occasions. I don't know. Maybe in short, I can say that.
Because we are running out of time. But thanks very much, Antonio. We also had 2 Maris brothers from FMSI who were there. Okay, you might know them. All right, Diego and Nodu were also there. They're also based in Rome over here. All right. So then we have in-country trainings, and these are really around the building of capacity and drafting the UPR submissions. Okay, we've lost the screen. Okay, they can see me both live as well as online very clearly. All right, and anyway, this particular slide, which will be in your Google Drive, is about connecting with ERI. All the different ways in which you can connect with ERI. We have a YouTube channel. Okay, explore it. Okay, that's what I'm going to say. All right. Finally, the last thing I want to say, since we're talking about since we're talking about a toolkit, when you're considering a toolkit, the one thing is, and Julia talked about this, the context. Keep that very much in mind. Okay, the political environment, the society's culture, okay, and the level of tolerance and openness to social change. Timing is also very important. While a march or demonstration will draw attention to an issue, at times it may provoke repression. Okay, keep that in mind. Organization, be aware of your strengths, be aware of where you need help. Risk, and again over here, some of our speakers, especially the Buddhi, spoke about this, okay, the backlash. All right, and be smart, okay? And that's where your recommendations come in. So with that, I'm going to stop, okay? Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias al hermano Tino, primero por tu tiempo y después por compartir con nosotros tu experiencia de advocacy. Como base tenemos los derechos humanos. Él más o menos compartió con nosotros los puntos, esos derechos humanos y cuáles son. Y después esto es una obligación legal y moral. ¿Y quiénes son los que tienen que responsabilizarse por la práctica? Primero, el Estado. Y hay también una instancia en Naciones Unidas donde nosotros podemos ser puente. Ahora tenemos poco tiempo, que nos queda 5 minutos. Yo no sé si hay gente en línea o solo nosotros. ¿Hay gente en línea o no?
Sí.
Only here, okay. Bueno, entonces tenemos 5 minutos para las preguntas y le queremos hacer a nuestros 2 participantes con nosotros hoy, Julia y Tino.
Yes, good afternoon.
Allá hay una. 2, 1, 2, primero aquí. 1, 2. Ok, empezamos con 2.
Okay. This question is for Julia. One of the significant issues preventing some of our advocacies from being realized is the lack of support from legitimate authorities. particularly regarding financial assistance. We often say that no matter how excellent our program or advocacy is, if there is no one willing to back it, it remains ineffective. My question, maybe an advice, using the advocacy toolbox, could you provide us with some advice on how can we persuade these legitimate authorities to support us? Thank you.
Yes, should I answer that now, or sorry, I wasn't sure if there were two questions coming together.
Vamos a escuchar las dos preguntas y después.
My question is to Brother Tino. Is that okay, or should I be? Go ahead, just ask. Okay. Brother Tino, as we've heard in the past few days, we've seen how UN has just been walked over, in the few months, in this last few years that has taken place. I mean, it wasn't respected, and neither has it been, it didn't have any say in whatever has happened in the past few years. So, I mean, even in Myanmar, you all have made a lot of submissions of petitions and all that, but we heard that it's still going on. What would you like to say about these things, in fact?
Perdón, antes de pasar a las preguntas, ¿podemos limitarnos en estas dos cuestiones? ¿Nos paramos en dos cuestiones? Escuchamos la respuesta y después cerramos, ¿ok? Julia?
Yes, I think it's very interesting that both these questions speak to an international context that is extremely challenging. And there is no denying that advocacy, whether it's at the UN level or at any other level today, is not what it was 10 years ago, but even 5 years ago. Let's be honest, I mean, just the re-election of the US president has provoked a whole series of cataclysmic kind of shakeups to the international order and particularly the development world. So with kind of regard to the question that was addressed to me, I think funding is in short supply around the world because, among other things, inequality is increasing, and the people who have money are spending it on going to Mars and building robots, and they are not spending it philanthropically or in ways that are aligned with the needs of 97% of the global population. And that is a very, very hard reality to acknowledge. It can be quite despairing, but I think it's important to acknowledge economic inequality as the starting point of our existence as advocates. So then, within that context, what can we do to persuade people to invest? Because as you say, without financial support, no matter how great a program, it's very difficult to affect systemic change. Sometimes, in the hyper-capitalist context that we all tend to inhabit, it's very useful to make a case for economic advantage. In other words, to make a case that spending money will save money in the longer term. And there are a lot of interventions, particularly around healthcare, around education. It's more difficult in areas, for example, around migration, it's difficult, but certainly climate change, I would say education, healthcare, climate adaptation, those are all areas where a case can be made that money should be spent today to save or make money even tomorrow. And so I think sometimes looking at that economic argument is really, really important. And then I think just kind of looking at how other people are using those narratives. I want to highlight, for example, that if I'm not mistaken, the slogan for this year's International Women's Day on the 8th of March is "Give to Gain." And when I saw this, I was shocked because I thought, is this really where we're at? People only want to give so they can gain. I felt like it's really, a low point in our discourse around, empowerment and kind of solidarity, but maybe acknowledging that that is where we are is useful. How can you speak to people who care about accruing money? That's the fundamental question. And I don't know if that's useful, but I think basically considering everything that we do in this framework of global capitalism is just the only way that we can inch forward a tiny bit at a time.
Gracias. La otra pregunta.
Oh, I'm on? Okay. Lavina, thank you for that question. And that's not just now, but right through the years, okay? That's a big question. What impact are our statements, our submissions making at the UN, right? One thing you have to realize is that the UN is, who is the UN? The UN are the 193 states. They're states. They're all going to be looking out for their own interests, okay? And so the UN is very political, especially in New York, all right? At least in Geneva, the focus is on human rights. You very rightly pointed out today, the UN, and Budi was pointing out also, multilateralism is disintegrating, okay? The UN processes, activities have been badly hit by the funding crisis. But thank God, these 193 states are going to come together on Monday for the next 6 weeks, and they are going to dialogue on human rights violations taking place in different countries. And they're going to at least suggest, there are going to be opportunities to recommend, to suggest what the way forward is. And let's be ready, it's a long way forward, okay? There are no quick fire results, all right? I'm just taking one example, the death penalty, all right? In the 1940s, 50s over there were only about 20 or 30 states, okay, that had done away with the death penalty, right? Over the years, that is one thing that has been coming up very strongly in recommendations, and today there are over 120 states that have done away with the death penalty. And the states that haven't done away with it, okay, have at least got a moratorium on it. There are very few states in the world, like Iran, China, that we've seen recently, and also the US, where the death penalty is still enforced, all right? So, and in this situation, if we walk away, if states walk away, what are we left with? So let's get to that table, let's sit at that table, let us advocate.
Ok, muchísimas gracias a todos los que han aguantado hasta ahora, a los dos que nos han ayudado en los últimos momentos ahora. Y mañana creo que seguimos igual, ¿no? Empezamos a las 9:30 y terminamos allá por las 5. Entonces, no sé si hay algún avisos parroquiales.
So, I want to thank Mariano. I mean, he was just caught like a fish from the river, like a fish from the river to moderate, and he accepted. Thank you very much for your generosity to do this. And I would like also again to thank Julia and Tino, who have really given us something practical to help us integrate that in our ministry so that they can become, they can really help us for systemic transformation. Because if the system are not transformed, we are not going to go far. You know, so thank you so much. As we are already late, I'm not going to dwell too much because we are all tired. And thank you to our translators who have really helped us to understand each other. And I wish you all a good night and a good rest, and see you tomorrow, the last day. Thank you.